Worship team sounded wonderful today. We had a couple swaps, and it's just cool that they're that versatile. You know, usually Amy's over on piano. Clayton, you sounded awesome, was on piano. But then Garrett, who usually plays drums often, is actually back in doing the sound. And I was like, man, the sound sounds so good. Yeah, thank you all very much. And Logan's helping him. Everybody say hi to Logan. That's awesome. Couple things, just so it's just easier, speaking with Dad, who's not here. I was hoping Dad would be here. And he had we actually had our PET scan this last week. Dad's got cancer, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. And really, really, really good news. It had not metastasized in the bone. I know a lot of you were praying for him. Yeah, it's a really good thing. There's some concerns with lymph nodes and stuff, and we're working on. But the thing, you know, if you just keep praying, he's just in a lot of pain. And I was hoping he'd be here. I'm sure that's probably why he's not here this morning. But I just appreciate your prayers, really do. We're going to finish today our study of Esther. We're going to actually come back next week in our all-church meeting and look at a theme from Esther that we'll talk quite a bit about. But Esther, I hope you've enjoyed this. I love the Old Testament anyway, but Esther has so much to teach us, particularly about how God chooses to work so often in our lives. And so often God actually works behind the scenes in ways that we don't really realize at the time, works through other people. And, you know, Esther is just a Cinderella story, or if, you know, I said a couple weeks ago, yeah, I think Cinderella is actually an Esther story. It kind of came first, but this little orphan girl grows up to be the queen of Persia. And not just any orphan. She's this Jewish orphan during this time when the Jews had been forced to exile. And there's so much there. And this little Jewish orphan girl, Esther, she is raised by her cousin. Her cousin is known as Mordecai the Jew. And that's so important. We talked a lot about this, but her cousin wasn't simply Mordecai. He wanted to be known as Mordecai the Jew. And that was so important because it was 4 generations into exile. I won't go into it. We've been talking about this so much the last several weeks. But, you know, everyone else, 4 generations into this exile, the rest of the nation had lost their sense of nationality. And that was the point of the dispersion. But not Mordecai. Mordecai was known as Mordecai the Jew. Everyone else had given up on their heritage, the Jewish heritage, but he remembered who he was. He never forgot who he was, and he never forgot whose he was. And he became Esther's adopted father, raised her. And he raised her to remember who she was and who she was. There is a huge lesson there. God brought Esther and Mordecai the Jew together for such a time as this, we're told. This story isn't just about Esther's call. It's just as much about Mordecai the Jew's call and really how those two interact and are dependent upon one another for God's will to accomplish as God wants it to. God placed Esther in this position, so she worked her way up to, she became queen of Persia. At the exact time, a plot had emerged to destroy all of the Jews in the Babylonian Empire. Complete genocide, just absolute genocide, stemming from this generational hate that had been based on race and nothing else. And this single man, Mordecai the Jew, her cousin, stepped up, raised Esther to prepare her for such a time as this. And it's so important to recognize her. You know, God had a plan. God had a purpose for them. They were not robots just simply following a script. And we've talked about this several weeks ago, but after she became queen and the Jews were threatened with this genocide, Esther, she wasn't going to do anything about it at one point. And it took Mordecai pushing, prodding for her to say yes to her call. God had a plan. Both Esther and Mordecai the Jew were critical. They were a critical part of that plan. And both of their calls evolved as the plan unfolded. And at first, Mordecai saved Esther. And as this young girl, she's called, he takes her in after she loses both her parents. Just like Moses, she was called to save the people. But without Mordecai the Jew, that would not have happened. Their stories, their calls were intertwined. Their stories were full of twists and turns too, right? I mean, this is life. Without really paying attention to what he was doing, the Persian king Xerxes, well, remember, he signed this decree to just destroy all of the Jews in one day. And unfortunately, an order of the Persian king back then couldn't be rescinded. And so it really was over for the Jews. I mean, there was no hope there whatsoever. The decree calling for the Jews to be destroyed on the same day throughout the empire, even once it was recognized what had happened, they couldn't stop it. This man that was responsible, Haman, had been caught in his own scheme. He was killed, but the threat didn't die. So the Queen Esther, she pushed the king on this. She publicly stated that she was a Jew. She was one of these people who were going to be put to death if this ruling stood. She put her head in the noose, if you remember. In front of the entire court, she told the king, if the Jews die, I, Queen Esther, will die with them. Because that's my people, king. They are my family, king. This is me, king. They are my people. I am one of them. Pushed the king into a corner. He had absolutely no choice. He couldn't revoke the order. But Queen Esther made it very clear to everyone in the land that she was a Jew. And she was going to die alongside her people. So the king came up with a plan. We saw this last week. He named Mordecai, her cousin, Mordecai the Jew, his second in command. And he threw all of his weight behind the Jews. The king not only gave the permission to the Jews to destroy anyone who lifted a finger against them, but he also said, you can plunder all of their property, you can take anything if anybody fights against these people. In effect, he was saying, if you lift a finger against the Jews, I am completely behind them. You touch them, you will be destroyed. And so, like I said last week, we're told many people converted to Judaism that day. They saw what was going on. But not everybody. And in Esther 9, chapter 9, we find out there is still hatred for the Jews, just racism still alive and well. Listen to what happens when the day of genocide comes. Chapter 9. In the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the very day the enemies of the Jews had hoped to gain power, which had been changed to a day when the Jews would gain power over their foes, the Jews gathered in the cities throughout all the provinces, King Ahasuerus, to lay hands on those who had sought their ruin. And no one could withstand them, because fear of them had fallen upon all of the people. All the officials of the provinces, satraps, governors, royal officials were supporting the Jews because the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. Mordecai was powerful in the king's house. His fame spread throughout all of the provinces as the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. So the Jews struck down all of their enemies with the sword, slaughtering, destroying them. And they did as they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 people. They killed the 10 sons of Haman. We're told they were the enemies. But verse 16 tells us they actually killed 75,000 people that day. Then they had this big celebration, like I said, the festival of Purim. What do you make of that? God's children killed 75,000 people that day. And then they throw a party. Does that bother anyone? I've kind of been struggling with this week. I knew this was going to come, and you can't ignore it. You can't just, not deal with the parts of the Bible that you don't like. And I love Esther. It's an amazing book of God's providence, right? And we've been just going through the story of this young orphan girl called to save her people from genocide, and it's good versus evil. It's how God works behind the scenes. There is so much in Esther, but in the end, yay, the Jews are saved, but they kill 75,000 people. What do you do with that? I mean, was that God's plan all along? Like I say, I knew this was coming. I knew we'd have to talk about this. And why couldn't the story have just stopped? Esther saves the day. They have a festival. But it didn't. But the more you think about what's going on here, the more we can understand what's happening, realizing this is a different world than ours. The big message is good conquers evil, first and foremost. This was supposed to be a day, complete genocide. That was the plan. The 13th day of the 12th month, they were going to go through the entire land and pull the Jews from their homes and destroy them. But we saw there was even more going on than that, because Haman's plan was to torture them well before he killed them. It was just like a cat and mouse, He wanted to prolong the suffering, to stretch it out, to kill them twice. First, we're going to release the date. We're going to tell everyone this is happening. We're going to tell everyone in the land what we're going to do in advance. We're going to come and destroy you. We're going to pull you from your house on this day. We're going to come for your children. We're going to pull you from your family and destroy you. I mean, if they had social media back there, they would have just sent out a post right away. Haman wanted to make this as public as possible. That was part of his strategy. Tell them in advance so they know. Make them squirm. And terrorize first. After the mental anguish, then we'll kill. I mean, the day is supposed to be set aside for the destruction of an entire race just based on ethnicity. But on that day, the Jews experienced salvation. There's a reversal that took place. Did you hear in Esther 9:1? Read, in the 12th month, the month of Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain power, which had been changed to a day when the Jews would gain power over their foes. Even when the queen had stood with the Jews, and then the king threw his weight behind, there were still over 75,000 people who were so filled with hate for a group of foreigners living in their land that they wanted to kill them just for being Jewish. But they were defeated. And that is the point of the end of Esther. Haman was second in command of the entire Persian Empire. He used his position to make genocide legal. But no matter what the law said, racism and hatred are against God's will. And whatever stands against God is going to be defeated. Hatred wiped clean that day, eradicated in the land is the point. On the big picture, what this is saying is that when everything seems bleak, when it seems that evil has won the day, there was no way out for these people whatsoever. Their tomb was sealed. It was locked. There was no hope whatsoever. They were done, but God was not done. When the day came and all of the dust had cleared, good had triumphed over evil. And then they celebrated. The festival wasn't about celebrating the violence. It was about celebrating the end of the violence. The reign of terror was over. When there had seemed to be no hope whatsoever, God was not finished. And in the end, the hatred and the racism was destroyed. And after everything was finished, Mordecai and Esther, they both wrote letters describing, and we're not going to read them all, but I want you to hear one line of one letter in 9:29. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. Queen Esther alongside Mordecai the Jew. They worked together. And their work was so intertwined. Both hinged on the work of the other. And I think this is how God had planned it. Mordecai raised Esther after her parents died, this orphan girl, completely helpless, all alone, but without Mordecai, she would have perished. But with his help, she became queen. And even then, at one point, like I said, Esther was just done. But Mordecai got her back on track. Queen Esther alongside Mordecai the Jew. Who is your alongside? Are you reaching out to them? Are you encouraging them? Because God has plans for you. God has things he wants you to do. Esther is a story about God's call and human response. How is God calling you? How is God wanting to work through you? And who is God calling you to work alongside? I think this is so important. Who are the people that you are called to journey with? You bring them to the table, or you don't. But when we don't, we can't fulfill what God is calling us to do on our own. I think this is such a huge part of God's plan, and we completely miss it and forget it. God brings people together for such time as this. And we forget how intertwined we're designed to be as humans. We're relational beings, right? We just want to get things done our way. I mean, we don't want anybody else's input. We got it all figured out. No opinion, no suggestion. God told me what we're going to do, and we're going to just stay clear and do what I tell you, what God had told me to tell you, so God's will can be done. But God made us relational beings. He calls individuals, don't misunderstand me. But don't forget, our call is so intertwined with the call of other people. I love how Esther teaches us sometimes one person gets to a point when they're ready to give up. That's when the other kicks in. And they pull us back on track. They give us some encouragement, and it saves the day. Sometimes that's all it needs. Esther is a story of hope. Esther is a story of God's providence. God calls, we follow, God provides. Esther is also a story of redemption. God bends evil, forces it to work for his purposes. God can force evil. God can bring good out of any evil, because God is greater than evil. Esther teaches us no matter how dark it may seem, no matter what evil is plotting against us, God has a plan. God is at work in ways we may not even realize at the time. No matter how dark, no matter how divided our world gets, God is. And God is there. And we can join his cause, or we can stand against his cause, but nothing can stand against our God. Nothing. You know, salvation is such an interesting thing. And we throw around this phrase, saved, so often. I don't really think we think too deep about what that means, beyond something that kicks in once we die. You know, because we focus on the truth that we're saved from evil. And we focus on the truth that we're saved from ourselves. And we focus on the truth that we're saved from damnation and we're saved from hell. And that's part of it. Don't misunderstand me. And there's no question. But I think we miss the real point of salvation. We aren't just saved from something. Being saved from something is just the beginning. It's the entry, it's the gate, it's the door. Salvation is being saved from something, but salvation is being saved for something. We're saved for life, to experience real life with God, joining God's vision of life. God is ahead of us, calling us to enter into his vision, being a part of what God is doing in the world, his kingdom work, redeeming this world, the beauty of his creation. And it starts on this side of eternity. What has God saved you from? What has God saved you for? How is God calling you to be a part of that work? How is God calling you to be as you're part of that work? And who are your along withs? Next week, we're going to gather, and we have an annual celebration. It's our annual meeting, and we've really modeled it after the Old Testament covenants. And in this, we'll gather for worship. And as part of our worship, we'll talk about not only, our accomplishments from this last year, we'll look ahead for the year to come. We'll provide everybody our nominations and our budget and all of that stuff. And as a group, we'll come together. And our goal really is to celebrate how intertwined the call is for our church. We're called together for such a time as this. We have an incredible legacy. We have an amazing future, but it's our time with the baton. We are going to celebrate God's call on our church for such a time as this. And then we'll have, like Jeremy says, a festival afterwards to be able to celebrate. It is such an honor to be a part of this community and to watch every single week all that you do. I want to thank you for that honor. I want to invite you to join deeper. Would you pray with me? Lord, I thank you for call. I thank you for your providence. And I thank you for the along with. How intertwined we are. Help us to realize it's about community. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.